Hello, everyone. This is another Black Conservative. I am Ryan Boland. Thank you all for joining me. Well, the masters of mind manipulation are at it again. And who am I referring to? President Joe Biden. And the other night, he had some contradictory words to actually say to the millions of Americans in a unity conference the other night, where he said some things that was like, okay, wait a minute, bro. You just said something earlier about Trump supporters as being semi-fascist. And now all of a sudden you want to call for unity? Let's get into what he has to say here. Let's analyze this. It's interesting to me how these politicians will get up, they'll say one thing that's clearly discernible. You know what they're saying. They know what they're saying. And then they'll come right up. Once it gets criticized, they'll come right up and say, well, I didn't really mean that. I meant that this. They know what they're doing, but we're going to get into that. We're going to get into that. President Joe Biden urged Americans to rise up and combat hate, even as he and Democrats continue stoking fear and anger against supporters of the Make America Great Again movement ahead of midterm elections. And, this always is the case when it comes down to elections. The closer you get to the elections, the more both political parties begin to hype up against each other, and demonize the other party. But it seems to me right now that it's the Democrats that's doing all the demonization here. Okay. So this is what Joe Biden says. We know this, or at least this is part of what he says in the transcript here. We know this. Hate-fueled violence is born in the fertile soil of a toxic division, he said, adding, we have to confront the ways in which our toxic divisions fuel this crisis for all of us, our differences. Find that interesting, Mr. Joe Biden, because you're the one that incited this. Last speech, you cannot listen to Joe Biden and say one thing and then come behind it and say something different and not have a bell ringing in your head. I mean, it's hard not to see this. It's hard not to see this. But he goes on to say, certainly don't turn a fellow American. This is what he said now. Certainly don't turn a fellow American into a sworn enemy, he added. Certainly don't turn a fellow American into a sworn enemy, but he just did. With Trump supporters and people who were supportive of Trump, Make America Great Again, and the MAGA situation and all that. He just did by calling them semi-fascists. You said that, Joe. Now, why would you say that and then come right behind and say, certainly don't turn a fellow American into a sworn enemy? I believe there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. The president goes on to say, the president spoke at a unity summit hosted at the White House, encouraging Americans to work to stop hate-fueled violence. That's the commentary section, right? Biden did not mention, now I want to read this part here because this is exactly what I was thinking. Biden did not mention his recent efforts to stoke fear and anger against supporters of former President Donald Trump's movement to make America great again by calling them semi-fascists. Isn't that what he said? He literally called them semi-fascists. That's what he said out of his mouth. It wasn't taken out of context or none of that. He said that. Everyone heard that. They heard it. Well, how can you deny it? But people are denying it. I know they are. People will deny he said that. And it's not out of context like they did with Trump all the time. But let's go on. He also did not mention recent comments by Democrat Senate candidate Tim Ryan from Ohio, calling for Americans to, quote, kill and confront the MAGA movement. I did a video on that. And I mentioned the fact that this candidate Tim Ryan, knew exactly what he was saying when he said what he said. He meant it. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a literal, in my opinion, a literal push to kill and confront. In other words, inciting violence. It's interesting to me that when these Democrats get up here and literally incite violence, none of them wants to say anything about it. None of them wants to criticize it. It's okay for the Democrats to do it. It's okay for the liberals to incite violence and actually commit acts of violence, all in the name of stomping down the oppressor. But when anything even remotely seems like that's the issue with those on the right, then they're jumping all over there's racism. See the mind games they're playing here? I'm going to expose them every chance I get. The president urged all Americans to unite. Get this now. The president urged all Americans to unite against the threat of violence and do their part to defeat it. Folks, he says, this is what he says. Folks, it's not just the federal government that can act. Everyone has a role to play in this story, he said, urging people to act. What do you mean urging people to act? What do you mean by acting, sir? What do you mean by that? Urging them to act? Act in what way? What is the subtext of you urging them to act? What is the subtext? Are you talking about urging them to act in terms of let's come together and be unified? We may have differences of opinion. We may have differences of outlook and political views, but let's come together and just come together and agree. We may agree to disagree on certain aspects of politics, but let's come together and say, hey, let's bring down these high gas prices and high food prices, and let's stop hating one another. Is that what you mean? Or is it urging people to act in the sense, go upside to conservatives' heads? Is that what you're talking about? I think it's the latter. I think it's the latter. I'm telling you, man, this is psychological warfare on another level. Psychological warfare. They're playing games. The president issued a long list of America's racist history, pointing to a through line of hate, what the heck that's supposed to be, in the United States that also sparked violence against other religions. Let me say something about that. I find that interesting that according to this article, the president issued a long list of America's racist history. I find that interesting because it was the Democratic Party that had the long list of America's racist history. It was the Democratic Party that supported slavery and wanted to keep it. It was the Democratic Party that created the KKK. It was the Democratic Party, that created the Jim Crow laws of discrimination in the Deep South. It was the Democratic Party that fought against all the laws and legislation that the Republicans tried to put together to free blacks and give them their civil rights. It was a Democratic Party. That's history. It's not my opinion. It's not my emotions. It's history. Look it up. But here, according to this article, the president issued a long list of America's racist history, pointing to a through line of hate in the United States that also sparked violence against other religions. See how they see this psychological warfare 101, how he flips it around. Clearly, from what he's saying here, apparently he's insinuating that the Republicans were doing it. That's a straight out lie. People who don't respect God and don't have morals and values, they'll lie to get their point across. And this is what he's doing. He's lying. Period. Bottom line. Let's go on. This is what President Joe Biden says. He says that through a line of hate never fully goes away. It only hides. He said, I don't know what the heck he means through line of hate. What the heck that's supposed to mean? He admitted that as a senator, he once believed that hate could be defeated, but said he now realized that if given enough oxygen, it would flourish once again. I find that interesting, that if given enough oxygen, it would flourish again. Who keeps giving racism oxygen? Who keeps giving it oxygen? Who keeps giving it room to breathe? The Democrats. I don't hear and see anywhere where Republicans and conservatives are constantly talking about race issues. And if they are, they're doing so in defense against the Democrats who want to spit the same stuff all the time because they don't have a formidable argument. Come up with, if you're so smart, Democratic politicians and liberals, come up with a formidable argument and stop spitting the same nonsense that you've been spitting for decades. And I know somebody may argue, well, Republicans and conservatives have been spitting the same argument too. Well, what other new argument we need to spit? What other new argument we need to come up with? We don't need to come up with any creative ways to combat liberals. Why should we? You don't need to be creative with them. You don't, because they say the same thing all the time. And I'm talking about academia. I'm talking about liberal academia and politicians. I'm not talking about people who support them. Although a lot of people that support them, I'm sorry, I feel you being deceived. I'm talking about those in the upper echelons of society. Okay? Those are the ones I'm talking about. Those are the ones that are constantly causing all this ruckus. Those are the ones that, as conservatives, we don't need to come up with creative ways to debate with them. What creative ways? It's simple. You're wrong. You're lying. You're twisting history. It's simple. In the last few years, the president goes on to say, in the last few years, it's been given too much oxygen in our politics, in our media, and on the internet. No kidding, Mr. Joe Biden. It was your party. Your party. He said, alluding to Trump's presidency, too much hate for all for profit, power, and profit. Basically, everyone, he's telling on himself and his party self. He's telling on his political party, the Democrats, for doing this. Who were mentioning all about race? Race. It was the Democrats. That's not my opinion. That's a fact. That's what I saw, and that's what I just let me rephrase that. That's what I saw. That's what I heard. I didn't hear it from Republicans. I didn't hear it from conservatives. I all heard it from the Democrats. They were the ones constantly spewing this out here. Anything that conservatives or Republicans had to say when it came to race, it was in defense. They weren't starting these fights, from what I observed. It's about power and profit. He continued criticizing people for allowing, quote, extremist violence to, quote, fester and grow. The president also urged audiences not to be intimidated by critics. Folks, we cannot be intimidated by those who are talking about this as somehow we're a bunch of wacko liberals, he said. This is what the article said. He said, I'm reading the transcript here. Clearly he said this. I'm pretty sure he said it. I don't think they're lying. We're a bunch of wacko liberals. You said it, buddy. I didn't. You said it. He again stated that domestic terrorism rooted in white supremacy was now the biggest threat to the United States. Enough, he shouted. He urged all Americans to speak up and condemn hate. Let me say something, too, about this statement here that it says he again stated that domestic terrorism rooted in white supremacy was now the biggest threat to the United States. And like I said, I didn't hear his speech. I can't stomach it. I'm just reading you the transcripts of part of what he said. And I'm giving you my view and commentary on that. But I can't stomach sitting up here listening to him lie. And none of these Democrats or politicians, period, lie. I can't stand that. But let me say something about this. About the phrase domestic terrorism rooted in white supremacy is now the biggest threat to the United States. The biggest threat to the United States is Marxism. The biggest threat to the United States is communism. The biggest threat to the United States is socialism. And this is enacted on both sides, but mostly on the left. That's the biggest threat to the United States, not white supremacy. Where do you see the white supremacy being a threat? Let's be realistic. Forget about what the president said. Forget about what liberal academia is saying. What do you actually see in your day-to-day life when you go to work or go to school or whatever? I mean, like truly, unless you brainwash and under mind control, which a lot of people are, what do you actually see as that are actual acts of white supremacy? I mean, like real down home, deep South, 1920s and 1930s white supremacy. I'll wait. I don't think nobody do. I don't think nobody. I'm pretty sure they don't. So if we don't really actually see white supremacy being an actual threat in our country, but yet in our heart we believe it. We believe it anyway. I hear people hooping and hollering about it anyway. Don't you think something is wrong with that? Don't you think that that's some mind manipulation? I do. You're being had bad. You're being bamboozled, led astray, run amok. They're playing with your mind, man. They're playing with your mind. He says enough, he shouted. I'm pretty sure he did shout because I saw a picture of him with his fists up like this. What's up with these fists doing all like this, balling his fists up? What do you mean by that? Even President Trump didn't do that. President Trump did this a lot. And I think that's where I get that from a lot. President Trump did this a lot. You know, he did that a lot. But when you raising your fist like that, what do you think that indicates to the perceptions of people that are watching you? What that suggests in a subconscious way is you angry and you're bitter. That's what that suggests. So this article saying he shouted this enough, he shouted. I'm pretty sure he probably had his fist up, looking like Hitler. He urged all Americans to speak up and condemn hate. You ought to. If you're silent, it's complicity, he said. We can't remain silent. In silence, wounds deepen. In silence, wounds deepen, he added. That's the end of that article. Yeah, you're right, sir. In silence, wounds do deepen. but you're using psychological warfare, bro. You say one thing and then you come right behind it and try to say, let's be unified. I believe in the summation of this video, he knows exactly what he is doing. He's a mind manipulator who probably is under mind manipulation himself. Okay. These people are masters of psychology. They know what they're doing. In the last speech he said, he meant what he said. And this speech is designed to contradict everything he said. Okay. So that's what I believe in. And what do you guys think? Leave your comments in the comment section below. Like, share, and subscribe.